Part 2 of my conversation with Emanuel Tove, the world's most prominent scholar on the Dead Sea Scrolls, starts now. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stone Chapel Podcast. I'm David Capes. Today's podcast is Part 2. The topic is the Scribes of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So go back and listen to Part 1 last week if you missed it. I learned a great deal both about the Dead Sea Scrolls as well as Second Temple Judaism and the skills it takes and the ways of a scribe. And boy, scribes do figure pretty prominently in the New Testament, don't they? Emanuel Tove is scheduled to give a Scholars Weekend here at the Lanier Theological Library and Learning Center April 4th and 5th, 2025. Registration starts soon and will likely fill up pretty quickly, so make sure you register early. You can go to our website, laniertheologicallibrary.org, if you'd like to register. Come meet him. Come meet the man himself. He is one of the most humble people you'd ever want to meet. So today, Emanuel Tove, professor of Bible at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, on the Stone Chapel Podcast.
And as I said, the scribes had to learn many additional things before they were able to write the scrolls in different levels of expertise.
One of the ways that we tell one individual from another is that they have different handwritings. So I'm wondering, can you identify by the handwriting some of these scribes?
It's a $1 million question. One of the riddles is, how many individuals can we recognize among the 950 different fragmentary scrolls from Qumran? It would make sense that we would recognize 10, 50 different hands. But we really haven't. First of all, it's very difficult because some of these handwritings are very formal. Just think about modern handwriting. It's very difficult. There has been one scholar, Dr. Ada Yardeni, great paleographer. Paleography is the study of ancient handwriting. She had a very special view, and she thought that she could identify one scribe, let's call him X, who had written 50 different scrolls. Her view has not been accepted, actually, by anyone. But there's been a very interesting development. First of all, there's a few scrolls that we can identify. There's one scribe that we are quite sure, according to his handwriting and some idiosyncrasies relating to the writing of the name of God, that we know that he has written, first of all, a copy of the community scroll and one of the copies of Samuel and the corrections in the large Isaiah scroll. So two corrections in the large Isaiah scroll. So that's one individual, and so we can find him in 3 or maybe in 4. Also in 4Q 175, in 4 different sources. But the most exciting news, still actually not well known in the world, it hasn't been fully publicized, is a research project led by Professor Mladen Popovic in Groningen, the Netherlands, that works with methods of artificial intelligence. They fed not all the scrolls, but I think some 150 different scrolls. So the writing of 150 different scrolls into a computer. Now you take the different stance, the different positions of the letter. Let's say you take a lamed, and whether the top line is completely straight or is a little bit to the left, 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 15 degrees. And so you put that all into the computer. Now, without thinking at all about the content of the writing, but just the formal technical data, they have found, or in particular one scholar, Gemma Hayes, has found a group of 8 different scrolls copied by one particular scribe. This is in her dissertation. It is not yet published. We're waiting for her book. I completely accept her view, in particular because it agrees with my own theory about certain writing styles. I think this is a wonderful new avenue of research about the identity of scribes, but at the same time, you should realize that we haven't found answers to the main question, namely that of those 950 different papyri, it's a very few scrolls. In very few cases, we were able to find the identity of scribes that wrote more than one different scrolls. It's too bad that also all these scribes remain anonymous, because in ancient times, at least in this part of the world, unlike in Mesopotamia, these scribes are anonymous. They don't say, I'm called Moshe, the son of Aaron, who writes this scroll. They don't say anything. So we remain we're grasping in the dark with regard to this scribe, and we have to start thorough research, and that's what I've been doing for 25 years, into the details of these scribes in order to know more about them, starting with the smallest details about letters, about ways of correcting, about dots here and dots there, about the ways in which they were writing precisely, in the ways in which some scribes were writing sloppily. You get to know about the personality of some scribes. I think that also Dr. Yardeni, who was a paleographer but also a calligrapher herself, I think she also knew that certain scribes were left-handed rather than right-handed. So you learn quite a bit about these scribes by meticulous research.
Now, these scribes, they weren't all the same. Some had more skill than others. Some had been scribes just a short period of time. Some were senior scholars and scribes. Did they have different duties because some of the younger scribes may not have copied different kinds of material, whereas a senior scholar might have copied something else? Do we know that at this point?
We don't know much about the different types of scribes. As I said earlier, I know about what I call a scribal school that was active at Qumran. And I think all the other scrolls came from sites in ancient Israel. I can say this scribe was more precise and this was less precise. But of course, much of this is imagination, because the major issue is you don't know the text from which they copied. In the case of the Bible, you think that you know the text from which they copied, but even there you don't know. Because there's not one text of the Bible. There were many, many different parallel texts. So it remains kind of guesswork what they were copying from. And in the case of other texts also, you don't know what they were copying from. We can't really divide the scribes into different groups. The only thing we can know is that this scribe is more experienced than that scribe. Most scribes were quite experienced, and a few scribes were sloppy or even apprentice scribes. Some scribes probably wrote only one sheet, one column, and we think that certain documents were really only made in order to practice the writing in the beginning of a scribe's writing career. For example, there's one document, it's named 4Q341, and this document, if we understand it well, is merely a list of names, mostly starting with letters, the same letters of the alphabet, with a mem and then with a nun. And this probably has no other meaning than that this was an exercise, a writing exercise, and that's also the name we've given to the document. In a few cases, we have an abecedary, that is the writing of the letters of the alphabet. So we know that scribes practiced. We have a few very badly written biblical texts, one of the Psalms, and we think that this is a practice. So these were beginning scribes. We don't think there were master scribes, but some scribes were very, very good. Now, what we do know is that scribes had different approaches. Well, let's put it this way. Consistency, as we know it today, was hardly born in antiquity. Consistency is a product of modern society. It's something you really have to think about. Consistency in antiquity was hardly born. Of course, there is some consistency, but not really to the extreme. So the whole idea of meticulously copying a document into a second document that is exactly the same as the text that you are copying from hardly happens. It happens often in the case of what we now call the Masoretic text, yes. But in most other cases, it hardly happens. You see, the scribe is a little bit of an author. The scribe explains. He's an exegete. So you see, sometimes the scribe explains a little bit. And you even see the scribe changes. The scribe in a legal document of the community, the rules of the community, it's called the 1Q community rule. There in column number 7, the scribe gives the punishments for misbehavior in the community. And so he writes in one case, if you have a grudge against your fellow man, you get as a punishment less rations for 6 months. Well, that's not so very good. And then he crosses this out with a line, and he writes above the line 1 year.
So it gets worse.
So he changes his mind, or he was told to do so. I don't think it was another scribe, it was he himself. But this is a scribe that creates the document while doing so. And also in another case of a law, in the same column, he changes the punishment. So the scribe is not, as we think, someone who slavishly copies the text in front of him, but in ancient time, a scribe was someone who is intimately involved in the creation of the document in two different degrees. And even in the holy text, in the text of the Holy Scripture, scribes dared to intervene and change a word here or there.
Wow. That's very interesting, because I know the Masoretes were very careful not to change anything. And yet, in generations earlier now, these scribes who are writing about the turn of the millennia, some writing in what we call BC or BCE, they're writing and they're making some of these changes. Very interesting. And so we can compare those two and we can see the difference.
Yes, what you say is exactly correct. You are talking about the Masoretes. You know them from the 9th or the 10th century of the Common Era. And I'm talking about the pre-Masoretes of the 2nd century or the 1st century before the Common Era and the 1st century of the Common Era. So they're a little bit apart. And they dare to change a word here, a word there, but they're still more precise than their fellow scribes who change much more.
I'm reminded, as I look over at my shelf, I have a lot of English Bibles over here. And when you read one translation, it's different than the next translation, which is different from the next translation. Each of these translations are a little different. And they're people of good faith who are making these translations, and yet they sometimes differ in how they interpret or read these particular words. So we have the same phenomena in a way today among us here. Dr. Emanuel Tove, it's been great to talk with you today about the Scribes of Qumran. I'm excited about your lecture coming up on April the 5th, 2025. And for those of you who can make it to the Lanier Theological Library, please come and join us for that. But for those who can't, it'll be online and it'll be streamed live. So get in touch with us. Look at our website. We'll be able to help direct you to that YouTube channel where that video will be found. Thank you so much, Dr. Tove.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
What an honor for this kid from Georgia to speak with Emanuel Tove. Well, he's a legend. Be sure to come to his lecture at the Lanier Library on April 4th and 5th, 2025. Starts at 7 p.m. Get here early. They help you with the parking. If you can't be in person, then you can stream it on our YouTube channel. Our website, laniertheologicallibrary.org, will show you how. Thanks to my wife, Kathy Capes, for editing this podcast and providing the transcript. Thanks to Jana Firestone and Jessica Mauser for their help in producing the podcast as well. Thanks to Phil Keggy and David Capes for our music. Give us a 5-star rating. Come on, it's not too much to ask, is it? Make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss one episode. Until next time, I'm David Capes. Thanks for listening.